I am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interviewed Alan Stein Jr. He is a world-renowned coach, speaker, and author. He has spent 15 plus years working with the highest performing basketball players on the planet and now teaches the audience how to utilize the same strategies in business that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. Alan specializes in improving individual and organizational leadership, performance, and accountability. He inspires and empowers everyone he works with to take immediate action, improve mindset, habits, and productivity. During my interview with Alan, we discussed how his parents were an influence on his future career by their example of following their purpose and helping him to understand the value of earning money. Through his journey, he found the combination of his love for basketball, performance training, and educating others that led him to enjoy what he does each day, even when there are hurdles to get across. I hope that you enjoy this episode with Alan. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. Today, I am here with Alan Stein Jr. And Alan, do you want to give a little background on yourself before we get started?
Sure, be happy to. I guess what would matter most to your audience, basketball was my first love. I spent the first portion of my life as a basketball player. And while I was in college, I started to develop an equal love for training and conditioning and performance work. So when I graduated from college in the late 90s, I decided to become a basketball performance coach. And the reason I share that is it was pretty exhilarating to graduate college and combine my original love of the game of basketball with a newfound love of performance training. And I did that for just under 20 years before I decided to make another distinct pivot and move into the corporate keynote speaking realm, which is what I do now. And the reason I say all of that is I'm so grateful that I've been able to not only earn a living, but build an extraordinary life around something that I'm so passionate about and really love what I do. So for those that like labels and titles, I'm a keynote speaker and I'm an author.
Awesome. Well, so happy to have you here. So why don't we start from the beginning and get to how you got to where you are today? So give me a little background on yourself. Where did you grow up? What did your parents do for a living? That sort of thing.
Sure. So I actually grew up where I still live now, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. I live in Gaithersburg, Maryland, about 30 minutes north of the city. Was raised here by two parents, both of whom were elementary educators. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years. My father started as an elementary school teacher and then moved up to administration and became a middle school principal. But two parents that were heavily devoted towards education. And I have a younger brother that's 3.5 years younger. We very much share the same sense of humor. But outside of that, we are very different in almost every way. My brother actually works with me now. He's what I call my digital ninja. And he manages my social media accounts, my podcast, my new email newsletter, my video work. I mean, he's kind of the behind the scenes guy with everything I have going on with my speaking business. So it's really cool for us to have an opportunity to work together. Even though I grew up in this area, my parents retired and moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, just over 20 years ago. And my brother got married and moved down to St. Augustine, Florida, 15 years ago. So I'm the last one here in the greater DC area, but
you're holding on.
Yes. And it's funny when my children grow up, I mean, I have twin sons that are just started 9th grade. They're 14 years old, and a daughter who just started 7th grade. She's 12. But whenever she graduates high school, I will most likely move somewhere else. I'm so ready to live somewhere different.
I get it. I've gone through the empty nesting, and a year and a half ago got a place in Florida as well. So
Awesome. I love it.
All right. So Well, first, let's talk about your brother a little bit. So, growing up, were you close growing up as children, or because that's really cool that you guys are able to manage working together?
Yeah, I would say when we were really young, middle school and below, we were definitely very close.
Mhm.
And I think even to his own admission, he probably had a little bit of the little brother syndrome where he would be interested in and want to do anything that I did. So if I
Yeah.
played sports, he'd play sports. If I, skateboarded, he'd skateboard. If I collected baseball cards, he'd collect baseball cards. And when we had all of those common interests, we certainly got along well. Then when he got to high school, understandably, he started to carve his own path, and he was in a band, and he's very artistic and very visual, and I'm a very linear thinker. He's very creative, so I think many of our differences became exposed at that point.
Mhm.
Not only differences in personality and temperament, but just in our interest, and we started to grow apart because we just didn't share the same interests, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term. So there was definitely a period of time, I would say from high school to young adulthood, that we kind of just did our own thing. There was never any malicious intent. There was never any
Right.
big falling out. It was just, hey, you've got long hair and are wearing flannel shirts and are in a grunge band, and I'm kind of on the athletic side, and we were just different. And
Yeah.
thankfully, we kind of came back full circle in the very early 2000s, because his interest in graphic design and the internet, which of course was kind of new at that time, is what kind of reunited us. And so he's basically been my digital ninja for 2 decades now.
Okay. So even prior to this, as a performance coach, you were working with him.
Yeah, as soon as I graduated college in the late 90s and started my own performance training company here in the DC area, this is kind of at the beginning of when people started to have websites. I mean, even with
Uh-huh.
dial-up modems and so forth. And yeah, he created the first website that I ever had. And it was all self-taught on his end. So he was super into that. And then that was the help I needed. And then same thing when social media got going, 2007, 2008, 2009, somewhere in that ballpark. That was something he became really interested in and developed a very high acumen for. And I certainly had an interest in it from a marketing standpoint. So that just kind of cemented our relationship even more.
That's very cool. So, and with your parents, because, so your brother's doing marketing, but your parents are teachers. Is that how you really got involved with what it's like to be a teacher or a trainer? Or what did how did you see them at work? Did you ever go to their classroom and get an idea?
Well, the thing that I got to see firsthand was, my parents loved what they did for a living, and
Hmm.
they took a tremendous amount of pride and got a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction out of pouring into young people. So I'm very thankful that what was modeled for me very early was two people that loved their work. Now, of course, teaching has a lot of pains. I mean, there's a lot of teaching that is incredibly challenging and difficult. So by no means am I saying that every moment of their lives were, puppy dogs and ice cream, but overall they found a tremendous amount of purpose in their work and a lot of fulfillment in their work. And I knew that I wanted that same thing. I didn't exactly know in what capacity, but I knew that I wanted to feel about my work the same way they felt about their work. Well, like many kids going to college, I didn't really have the foggiest idea of what I wanted to do for a living. So I actually started college as an elementary ed major. I figured, hey,
Oh.
if I'm going to just take a shot at something, I might as well just do what my parents did. And I learned very quickly that was not the path for me. That teaching, I enjoyed pouring into young people, but I did not enjoy teaching. And that was when I decided to follow the path of being a performance coach. I kind of looked at it as, hey, basketball would be my subject, strength and conditioning and performance work would be part of that, and I would still be a quote unquote teacher. But when you
Hmm.
do it in that capacity, then you're called a coach or you're called a
Yeah.
trainer. So it was still a derivative of what they did. I just kind of found the subject that I loved, which was performance training in basketball.
What struggles did you see them have as teachers? You said there were pain points, but they were able to stay aligned with why they loved it.
Well, I mean, for starters, I do think most people will acknowledge that teachers are fairly undercompensated, for
Hmm.
the role they play in our country and for how much time and effort they pour into young people. Relatively speaking, you're not going to get rich being a teacher. Now, that's okay. And my parents' goal was to never, that was being rich wasn't one of the factors of why they chose their vocation.
Right.
But that's certainly a constraint. Another constraint, you're responsible for 30 young lives every single year. And anyone that's ever been in an elementary classroom can acknowledge that you don't always go 30 for 30 for having kids that are easy to work with. Every single time you've got 30 kids in a class, you're going to have one or two that they try your patience. They have behavior problems. They have, discipline issues. And then of course, the next rung of that is you're not just dealing with young people, but you're also dealing with young people's parents. So now you've got to
Right.
be able to talk and communicate with parents that are unhappy about what's going on. So, it was a lot, but nevertheless, their purpose of an altruistic profession of servant leadership and pouring into young people was what I saw most often. And yeah, every once in a while they'd have a tough day or a tough issue with a kid. But overall, my parents enjoyed what they did for 30 years. And for that, I know they're very grateful. And I'm very grateful that they modeled that for me.
Yeah. So what was it? Why did they feel this need to be pouring into young people? Was there something that drove them in their lives to that made it so passionate for them?
Honestly, I don't know where that fire started for them. I
Yeah.
just know that that is something that they took a lot of pride in. And I've known that, some of that has been downloaded to me. I mean, when I was in the basketball performance training space for almost 20 years, the overwhelming majority of players I worked with were high school or middle school age. I mean, I enjoyed not only teaching players how to run faster and jump higher, but I really took pride in being a role model for them off the court and helping young people navigate their young lives at 14, 15, 16 years old. So I loved pouring into kids. And part of that stemmed from how many people that poured into me as a youngster. I mean, I was involved in sports, from 5 years old all the way up through college. And I can think of how many times, coaches got me excited about the sport, or I would have fun and making memories and making friends. So yeah, to me, it was just ingrained. And I've always, loved kids and loved children and loved pouring into young people. Still to this day, even though my primary vocation is as a corporate keynote speaker, I still get opportunities to go speak to teams or to coaches or to school districts. And I love those opportunities.
Yeah, awesome. So give me a little background on your basketball. So where did that begin and where did you go with that?
Well, my parents signed me up for my first team at 5 years old in kindergarten, and I fell in love with the game immediately and just had an absolute blast. Now, for my younger years, I had then, and I still have now, for someone that's almost 50 years old, a tremendous amount of physical energy. So I was
Mhm.
attracted to anything that just let me expend energy, anything that let me run and jump and climb and crawl and, throw a ball and catch a ball. I was into. And I did just about every sport under the sun, including some non-conventional ones, skateboarding and BMX biking and martial arts, as well as your traditional sports of soccer and basketball and football. But despite being exposed to all of those different things, for some reason, basketball always won out. Basketball always ended up being my favorite. Now, part of it too is the timing. I mean, I'm 48 years old, so when I started, my most formative years of playing basketball was when Michael Jordan first came on the scene. Who not only changed the game of basketball, but changed pop culture. I mean, you're talking
Mhm.
about an absolute rock star. I mean, I was just infatuated with him. My room was just covered in Michael Jordan posters and memorabilia, and I would watch every single game he played. I mean, I was just so that certainly helped. Continue for the fire to keep burning. But yeah, basketball was just always it. And as I've been able to look back, I think one of the reasons is I heavily identify as an introvert. Like I love solitude. I love alone time. I love, like being by myself. It's what refuels my tank. And one of the things I loved most about basketball was the two primary skill sets of handling the ball, dribbling, and shooting were two things that I could work on by myself. I could take my ball and go down to the playground and just play for hours by myself and just have my own thoughts. Or in those days, bring a boombox and play some hip hop music while I was shooting hoops. But I could work on my game by myself, and
Hmm.
then I could go to practice with my teammates and use everything that I had done with myself to try to make them better and try to help us win games. So I love the fact that I could combine being alone and work on my game and be with
Hmm.
others. And there's not a lot of other sports, team sports, that you can do that. I mean, you can't really play football by yourself. You can't really play
Hmm.
baseball or soccer by yourself. Soccer,
Hmm.
you can work on some moves and kick into a
Hmm.
goal, but football and baseball, you kind of need someone else to throw and catch with. So
Right.
for whatever reason, there was just something about basketball that just combined everything that was the right fit for me.
What was it about Michael Jordan
I mean, he was just the coolest. I mean, still to this day,
that
I mean,
made him
he's the
cool?
coolest. I mean, like I've said numerous times, I'm almost 50 years old and I have an entire wall in my room of Michael Jordan shoes because I still wear Jordans. Like his shoes are more popular today than they were when I first bought them in the late 80s. And
Yeah.
I mean, that dude is the coolest of the cool. And he was then. And like I said, he not only changed the game of basketball, but he changed pop culture. He's one of the very first team sport athletes that was promoted individually. Like Nike had a shoe just about him, even though he
Hmm.
played for the Chicago Bulls. So he changed everything about the game. And he was just, yeah, I can't think of a better way to describe him than he was cool. And in my formative years of late elementary school, middle school, and college, you're attracted to what you think is cool. You want to be
Right.
cool when you're that age.
Yeah. Was there any traits about how he played basketball that you modeled after or kept in your mind?
Well, certainly attempted to. And, that was part of the fun. One of the things I loved, especially about those sessions where I was just by myself. And by the time I was in middle school, my parents put a basket up in our driveway in our front yard so I could literally play every single day. Oh, and you better believe that was when my imagination and my imagery and my creativity would come to life. I mean, I would be in my front yard, I'm 5'3", 100 pounds soaking wet in seventh grade, and I'm pretending that I'm Michael Jordan, and I'm visualizing that I'm playing for the Bulls, and I'm doing shots that I saw him do the night before in a game, and it was just, I mean, it was just playtime, and it was so much fun, and those are some of my absolute fondest memories as a kid. We're doing some of those things on the basketball court, and still to this day there's very few things that I find as therapeutic as just going and shooting hoops. I mean, I certainly can't move or play like I used to, but if you just give me a ball and a basket and I'm just kind of shooting around for 30 to 40 minutes, it's very reflective for me. It's great
Hmm.
stillness and thinking time. There's something almost meditative about it. And I
Hmm.
absolutely love it. And it started in my driveway, 35, 40 years ago.
So what was when you were young, what is it that you wanted to do? Did you want to be professional or what was your goal with
Yeah, I
it?
mean, certainly elementary school and middle school, I thought that I had the raw materials to be able to play in the NBA because at that time, pre-internet, pre-social media, you can't see any farther than the end of your street. And for me, it just made sense logically. Hey, I'm the best basketball player at my elementary school. Well, that's got to be good enough to play in the NBA. Little did I know there's, 100,000 elementary schools in the United States, and every one of them has a best basketball player. So it wasn't until I got to high school that my world expanded and I was like, okay, even if I'm the best player at my high school, there's some other really good players around at other high schools. So that's when I don't want to say I lowered my goal, but I reshifted and I pivoted. So my goal when I got to high school was no longer to play in the NBA. I knew that wasn't going to happen, but it was, could I play college basketball? And that was a really important goal for me that I was fully invested in, and I'm proud to say that I was able to. Now I played at Elon College, a very small school in North Carolina, so I didn't play for Duke or Kentucky or UNC or Indiana, but I still checked the box of playing college basketball and achieving a goal that I had. And certainly in the mid 90s, someone that plays at Elon College is not at the top of the list to go to the NBA. So it just cemented the fact that it was okay to be able to play at that level. But I knew that when college was over, my playing days were also over. And I wanted to find something else that lit me up the way playing basketball did. And that's what kind of drove me to basketball performance training, where I could still do something that I loved, just do it in a different capacity.
So how did you even get into that or know about it? Because
Well,
it's
I'm
not
so
necessarily a popular thing you hear, as a
No,
career.
well,
You know,
the
people.
crazy part is it's way more popular now than it was in the late
Yes.
90s. In the late 90s, it was almost unheard of. So I kind of got in at the right time because when I started to get into that profession, there was a lot less competition. There was an abundance of opportunities to make things happen, which I'm so grateful for. But honestly, I didn't look at it as anything other than I love basketball, I love performance training, and I like pouring into young people. Well, if I draw a Venn diagram with those three things, the thing in the middle is become a basketball performance trainer for high school kids. I didn't really put any more thought into it than that. And it was a great decision because I absolutely loved what I did. And thankfully, just being at the right time, in the right place at the right time and at the right age, after a few years of that, that industry started to really expand and explode. And you started to see there was much more of a need for it. So business was very good. And then, the next crop of players after Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Michael Jordan, that next wave of players, the LeBron James of the world, were super into that type of stuff. So that actually helped it because, when the best players in the league are doing the types of stuff that you're doing, that just makes it
Mhm.
a much easier sell, especially to high school age kids. So I just got in at the right time and at the right place.
So were you always in your own business or were you part of another business that
No,
was,
I've been self-employed my entire adult career. There was
Mhm.
a gentleman that as soon as I graduated college, he was training a couple of NBA players here. And that was why I moved back to this area to kind of be an apprentice and a mentee to him, and did that for almost a year and kind of learned everything that he was doing. And then at that point, um, probably part naivete and part arrogance, I was like, all right, I'm just ready to do this on my own. I don't need to do this for anyone else. I'm 23. I know everything there is to know. Why don't I just go ahead and do it myself? And I kind of jumped in head first. And ever since then, I've been self-employed in everything that I've ever done, which is something I'm very comfortable with now, but I didn't know any different then. And when you're fresh out of college and you're in your low 20s, you got a very low cost of living. I could survive on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I split rent with three of my high school friends. We all shared an apartment. I didn't need a lot of money, so it was okay if I wasn't making a ton of money. I was doing what I loved, and I had a whole bunch of friends who graduated college and they had to put on suit and ties and go work in cubicles, and I just didn't want to do that. I mean, I literally got to do something with basketball and in the weight room and on the court with young kids every day of my life. I was like, this is amazing. And so thankful that I went that path.
well, and also that you knew your purpose so young and were kind of taught that by watching your parents. I mean, that's a big thing because a lot of times the focus is on the title or the profession, not on purpose.
Yes.
So how did your parents support you in that process of being okay with not pushing you toward a title versus your purpose?
Well, understandably, they were a bit hesitant. I would never use the word disappointed because I don't think my parents have ever been disappointed in me. I imagine there was a little bit of disappointment when I decided not to go the elementary educator route. For 2 years, I was on that track with my college courses, and I'm sure on some level they were proud that I was following in their footsteps. And then when I took a very quick about face and said, I ain't doing this, I want to do something else. Again, I don't want to speak for them and I've never asked them, but yeah, they were probably a little disappointed, but they've always supported and championed and cheered on what I was doing. I do know that my parents are very conventional thinkers. I mean, you have two people that basically worked for the same school system for 30
Right,
straight years, collected their pension and retired. So my parents, and I say this with all the love and grace I have in my heart, they don't have an entrepreneurial bone in their body. They don't
right.
have a self-employed bone in their body. The thought that I wasn't coming home to work for someone else, but I was coming home to scrape and hustle my own livelihood. I'm sure just worried them as a parent. It's not that they didn't believe in me. They've always believed in me, but they're probably thinking, I know you don't have a lot of expenses, but are you sure you can find enough high school kids to train to pay your rent and pay your car insurance and pay your car? They were probably just understandably a little bit worried. And,
Yeah.
that probably lasted for a few years until I proved the concept that, hey, I can at least stay afloat. I'm not going to be a multimillionaire training high school kids in basketball performance, but I can at least make a decent living. And of course, the good part was, making a living, the from a financial standpoint, the bar was fairly low with them being teachers. So I certainly could hustle enough to train enough people to make what an elementary school teacher would make per year. And that was great. And
Yeah.
and then they finally started understanding what I was doing there. And then I made this pivot to keynote speaking, which is another world that they don't really know a whole lot about. And even to this day, when someone says, what does your son do? And they just say, well, he's a speaker. He goes and he talks to businesses. I mean, I don't know that they can describe it much more than that, but same thing. And now that I've been self-employed for 25 years, they just know this is how I'm wired. They know that I'm comfortable having to hunt and kill my own living. I mean, so for basically my entire adult life, I have been 100% commission based, and I'm
Hmm.
okay with that. I don't think they would be for
Yeah.
themselves if they had to do it over, but they certainly know that I can do it now, and they believe in me now.
Well, and that's what I was actually going toward with the question because, you know, having parents that are teachers, and have been in the same career, where did you model yourself after? Because, I came from an entrepreneurial family, so I saw, you know, business owners and what you had to do to get business. And, a lot of times that will come back to me when I need it, inside. But, did you model yourself or did you have some mentors to help you in that shift from what you were used to growing up with?
Not really. It really, I think, came from equal parts naivete and equal parts arrogance of just thinking that I could just do it. I mean, one of the interesting parts, and I also say this with a tremendous amount of love to my parents who did a phenomenal job with me and my brother, but because they were on, I guess the fixed income of being teachers, I very much grew up with a scarcity mindset. I very much grew up with a not enough mindset. Like, you need to save and you need to be very cautious with the money you have because, whatever we make in a year, well, that's all we have. And for whatever reason, I'm kind of the black sheep of the family, and I've always been very different. And I've always been driven by financial and monetary success. I've always had a taste for nicer things. And I
Mhm.
still joke with my parents to this day. I mean, they don't like going to nice restaurants. They don't like staying in nice hotels. They drive very, very low end conservative cars because that's what they like. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't say that with an ounce of judgment. I love my
No,
parents very much
it's
and I love
all
the
good.
life they built.
Yeah.
But I've always wanted bigger and better. And one of the things my parents taught me when I was younger, and I don't think this was intentional, I just think it's what they did at the time. So we talked about Michael Jordan. And when I
Yeah.
was younger, the Jordan shoes, like when the Jordan 1 came out, like it was the hottest shoe on the market. And it was like $100, which at the time you could get a pair of
Nothing.
really nice basketball shoes for 25 or
Yeah.
$30. But I wanted the Jordans, and I could not convince my parents to buy me Jordans. They just said, hey, basketball shoes cost $30. If you want $100 shoes, then you need to go out and earn $70. Like, we'll give you the $30 it costs for basketball shoes, but if you want something better than that, then you've got to earn that money. And I said, fine, I'll take that bet. So I started working at a very young age because I wanted to earn money to have the things I wanted. They ended up having the same deal when I turned 16. My parents said, however much money you've saved when you've turned 16, we'll match that and you can get your first car. So I saved up like 2,500 bucks and I got myself a $5,000 piece of crap as my first car. And I was so proud of that thing
Yeah.
because I had some skin in the game. So I learned at a very early age, if I want nicer things, I got to go out and hustle for them. I got to go out and work for them. And I've kind of always had that mentality. Now, as I've gotten older, Thankfully, I've become a lot less materialistic. I skew more towards being a minimalist, if anything else. In fact, the overwhelming majority of things that I have in my apartment, you can actually see in this screen behind me because my office is filled with different mementos and knickknacks and memories. But if you go through the rest of my apartment, it is very minimalist. So I'm not as driven now by material items, but I am driven by financial security. I am driven by financial freedom. I'm still very much a capitalist at heart and want to make as much money as I can to provide me and my family with opportunities and experiences and security. So most of that hasn't left me. It's just not directed towards, like, I don't need $1,000 suits or $20,000 watches. I don't need to have a fleet of cars. Like, I'm pretty basic when it comes to the material items, but I still heavily crave that financial freedom and financial security. And that's why I still to this day hustle and work as hard as I do. And I think my parents kind of inadvertently, accidentally taught
I
me
was gonna
that
say,
by saying
yeah,
that.
it's interesting, right? Like everybody's born, with these unique souls of, what drives them and because that drove you, but they actually taught you entrepreneurship, which is kind of funny, and they didn't even realize they were on that path with you, just more like you've got, you want that, you have to understand the value of money.
100%. Absolutely. And for that, I'm grateful. And for my
Yeah.
own children, I'm trying to take the best of both worlds. I'm trying to
Mhm.
think that the lessons that my parents did teach me that I'm in full alignment with, as well as things that I believe that are different. I mean, that's, like I said, I am kind of the black sheep of my family on most major topics, whether you're talking about politics or religion or money or sex or anything in between. I am very counterculture to what my parents believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And that part I'm okay with. I mean, one thing my parents did help with is try to teach me to be a free thinker. And that's what I try and do with my own children. I mean, I had this
Mhm.
conversation with my own kids the other day and said, hey, I will never tell you guys what to think, but I'm going to consistently try and teach and model for you how to think. And if you ever
Mhm.
ask my opinion on anything or what I believe, I'm happy to tell you, but don't think for 1 second that I expect that you need to believe the same thing. You have every right to form your own conclusions and your own opinions. And, that even can spark some very healthy debate, which I think is much
Yeah.
needed in today's world. I think we need to be
Mhm.
able to have civil discourse with people that believe things that are different than us. And I'm all about that and love that.
Yeah. So are the messages now that you're trying to get across in your speeches when you go out and talk to corporate environments?
So, from a corporate standpoint, most of what people bring me in for is some derivative of performance, either
Mhm.
individual performance at the employee level. How can we get our employees to improve their habits and their mindset and their focus? Some groups bring me in more for leadership training. How can we become more impactful and influential? How can we improve our perspective on how we lead? How can we lead with more core value based decisions? How can we be more purposeful? Some groups bring me in more for organizational performance. How can we get everyone playing together nicely in the sandbox? How can we improve role clarity and communication and accountability? And then many groups want a little bit of each of those. Like, hey, we want
Mhm.
our people showing up as their best selves. We want our leaders pouring into others, but we want everybody to get along and be rowing in the same direction. So it's usually one of those pillars, but it's all under the umbrella of performance. I don't really speak to anyone that's looking for something outside of that, because that's outside of my wheelhouse of what I believe I have to offer.
Mhm. So now, if I wrote down your purpose before correctly, it was performance training, basketball, and love kids. So has your purpose evolved now with what you do?
It has, but it hasn't. It's still fairly similar. I still consider what I'm doing today to be performance training. I'm just not training 15-year-old boys to run faster and jump higher. I'm training men and
Mhm.
women in the corporate space how to show up as the best versions of themselves so they can make a maximum contribution to their team. So it's what I'm doing is still very similar. It's just the way that it's expressed is different. Instead of being in a weight room with 15 high school basketball players, I'm now on a stage in front of 300 sales professionals, but the goal is the same. How can I get you to commit to the fundamentals, to show up to be the best version of yourself so that you can make a maximum contribution to everyone and everything around you? Just your contribution won't be putting a ball in a basket, on Friday night. But really, I still look at what I'm doing to be very similar.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so many great things that you've shared with us today, and I'm sure everyone's going to appreciate it. I like to close out with just some rapid fire questions.
Awesome. I love it.
So you pick a category, either family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
Let's go with health.
Okay, cool. All right, so things or actions I don't have that I want to have with my health.
Man, I know I'm going to sound like I lack hubris with this one, but no, I can't think of anything because I have been for the last decade in particular so dialed into my physical health. It's a huge part of my identity. I mean, I am militant with my morning routine and my workout routine and my eating. Now I am exposed to new stuff all the time. I mean, perfect
Hmm.
example, like 2.5 years ago, I started reading and hearing about the benefits of sauna. And now I do 2 to 3 sauna sessions a week and haven't missed for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I hear about the benefits of cold plunge and cold therapy, same thing. I hear about a new work. So that is constantly evolving, and I do the best I can to stay on the cutting edge. But at
Mhm.
this moment that you asked the question, I can't think of a single thing that I'm not doing that I want to be doing or should be
Yeah,
doing.
that's awesome. Um, so anything that, as far as your health, that you do have that you want to keep?
Thankfully, I've got pretty high energy levels. I mean, I told you when I was 5 years old, I was constantly running around looking to
I
expend
just keep
energy.
picturing a dog in the
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that. You've got to get the energy out.
I still have a degree of that. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm not able to work out for a few days, I mean, I'm just like a caged lion.
Hmm.
And now what I've learned that it takes a lot more at 48 years old to restore that energy. I
Yeah.
need more sleep than I've ever needed before. I need to eat healthy. I need to have proper days off and get rest and recovery. There's things that I have to do now that I didn't have to do when I was younger. I mean, it's kind of like the way I look at it now. So like my iPhone's a couple years old now. So the battery it's not quite what it used to be. When I first got my iPhone, this specific model, like the battery was at 100 and you could be on it for hours and it'd be down to like 93%. Now if I'm on my phone for hours, it goes from 100 down to 12%, and
Yeah.
I got to plug it in all night to get it back to 100. That's kind of how I view myself now. It takes a lot more intention and purpose to have the rest and recovery to be high energy. So it doesn't
Mhm.
just happen automatically. Whereas when I was younger, I was just brimming with it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Things are actions that I do have that I don't want.
I can become a little bit
I'm
rigid.
sorry, I said that wrong.
Oh, go ahead.
Repeat that question. Things are actions that I don't have that I don't want. So you don't want to have it as part of your health.
Boy, that's an interesting one. It's funny when you read it the first time where my mind went to, and maybe this will spark an answer to what you did actually ask. I'm trying to learn to get better at having a little spontaneity and letting
Hmm.
go a little bit. Like my
Mm.
comfort zone is in structure. I love
Yeah.
structure, I love routine, I love consistency, I love systems and processes. Like if I showed you the level of detail at which I monitor my workouts and my eating and my sleep, it makes most people claustrophobic because it's
Yeah.
oppressive, but it's what I love and it's
Yeah.
how I operate best. So I'm not encouraging anyone else to do that in their lives, but I found what works well for me. And I'm trying to get much better at the flexibility and having the resilience that when my schedule or my routines get knocked off kilter, that I can still perform at a high level and I can still be a functional human being. Those that are closest to me know when my routine gets knocked off course, I can be
Hmm.
a little irritable. I can be a little moody. I'm not my best self. And that's absolutely something I'm trying to improve because I don't ever want my external circumstance to dictate how I show up in the moment. And I'm getting way better at that. but I ain't out
Mhm.
of the woods yet.
I totally get it. Yeah, I'm very routine oriented as well, and so it gets hard, especially with travel, right? Like to stay on it.
Absolutely. But that's
Yeah.
what's funny. That gives me, when I travel, I get even more dialed into my routines because it does give me some level of control. But what I'm trying to do is like make sure that I'm not downloading that onto my children. Like I want to make
Right.
sure my children know, hey, you guys have the ability to opt in to do what you want to do, and you can create, your own, your own patterns and your own routines, and they don't have to be the same as mine. So I constantly try to encourage my kids. I constantly try to model for them the traits that I do believe would be in their best interest to emulate, but I don't make or force my kids to do anything. They know on the weekends that they stay with me because I'm divorced. That hey, daddy's getting up at 7 in the morning and he's going for a walk and then he's going to the gym and then he's going to make breakfast. And if we want to do any of those things, then we need to wake up and do it with him. If they want to
Yeah.
sleep in and don't even bat an eye until I get home, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But they know what I'm doing while it is that they're still sleeping, and I don't guilt them or shame them. I let them figure that out. And funny enough, when you give them that autonomy and that freedom, and then you model those things, and they see the pride that I have in what I do, slowly but surely, now that they're getting older, they're starting to opt into those things a lot more than they used to. And it's not because
Oh
I'm
yeah.
forcing them or making them. That's just the path that they're slowly going down.
Yes. Watch and learn.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, great. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you close out with or the audience walks away with?
No, this was so much fun. I do a lot of podcast interviews, and this went in a completely different direction than most of the interviews I do, which was very refreshing. You got me talking about some things that I don't talk about a whole lot, which felt really good. So no, this was a blast. I'm so glad we connected. I mean, if anyone listening or watching, if you ever need anything from me, I'm very responsive and very easy to get a hold of. My website is alansteinjr.com, and I'm at Alan Stein Jr. on all the major social platforms, and I'm good about getting back to folks. So yeah, if I can ever be a further service, or if anyone watching or listening has a question or a story they want to share, would love to hear from them.
Love it. Yeah. And all that will be in the show notes as well, if you missed that when he said it. So thank you so much for being on and sharing your story, Alan.
Yes, it was so great to see you again. Thank you so much.
And now for my mindful moments with this interview with Alan Stein Jr. Hopefully, you were able to take a lot of his stories and be able to apply them into your own life. Now, I thought it was just fascinating how his parents were definitely more on the traditional path in life with being teachers and being in the same job their whole career. And Alan taking this path of being an entrepreneur. And we really came back to a couple of key concepts that really taught him how to navigate this world of entrepreneurship without him even realizing. And one of them was purpose. One of the things that he saw with his parents is no matter how hard a student was or the year was, or the fact that they weren't getting paid as much as maybe other professions, they loved their work. They were all about really being responsible for these young people's lives and wanting to see that impact. And I think it's really important that we talk about personal purpose, because personal purpose is one of those things that often gets ignored because we spend time on the titles we want or the career we want, but not really why we want it and what drives us, because that purpose can shift decisions that you make in your career, sometimes going backwards, sometimes going forward, because you believe so much in the work that you are doing. And so when we can really get ourselves centered around what our personal purpose is, it becomes a very important thing in driving our happiness in the work that we do. And so one of the things that we talked about was his personal purpose, because we talked about the fact that this was so important to his parents. And really, it was his love for basketball, and that he loved performance training and seeing the results that you got out of that. And he also loved teaching kids and really pouring into them, something that he definitely got from his parents and watching his parents. But he also had something different and unique from his family. And one of the things that we talked about that is interesting is his love of things, and his parents being on a finite budget really drew him to understand how he had to earn money to get the things that he wanted. And his parents taught him the value of hustling, which I think a lot of times when we think of entrepreneurs, when we think of the higher level in organizations, I know I get into this conversation a lot where especially people in accounting firms that move from senior managers to partner or directors to partner, how different it is once they become a partner, because there's hustle. There is business development that has to happen. When you own a business or you're a CEO of a business, your biggest focus is sales, because without sales, the business cannot survive. And so this lesson his parents taught him early on of, we can give you a finite amount of money. However, you've got to figure out the gap and how you're going to get the things that you want. And I think that's a very important lesson, no matter if your parents are teachers or your parents have the means, is what is it that we can do to instill that value of goals that we have, that they aren't just a given, and we're not surprised once we get there that something is going to be asked of us that we're not prepared for. So because he was prepared for that as a child, it really helped him eventually build into that as an adult when he decided to go his own course and be an entrepreneur, which I thought was a really interesting twist in being an entrepreneur, because most of the people that I interview or talk to that are entrepreneurs have come from that kind of family, or they've seen it in their family, or they've seen some struggle that has helped them understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur and have to drive that for yourself and be 100% responsible for the income coming into yourself and your family. Another important thing that we talked about is this, you can look at a speaker and you can look at people on stage and think, oh, they're probably an extrovert. And what you heard him say was he actually identified as an introvert. And one of the reasons he liked basketball so much was the time alone by himself, the dribbling, the practicing, the just doing the reps so that he could get better and better. Or he could go try things that he couldn't try and fail at in front of other people, but things that he saw Michael Jordan do, he could go do by himself. I think that's an important lesson in everything we do, that we have to have that alone time to plan in business, that it isn't just in a hobby or a sport that we need that time to do the reps, to practice, to make sure that we are doing the right things in our business and actually analyzing that, or even in our own careers, that if we want to get from here to there, what are the things that we are practicing, preparing for, all the things that we need to learn in order to get to that level that we want to get to. So I think it's really, really important that we understand where we're going to find that time to practice, where we're going to find that time away from others to really put in the time to think, to be still. He also talked about how basketball is really that one place where he can think, that it's the time that he gets the ideas, because he's just allowing himself that time to process. So really finding that time to be still, as uncomfortable as it can be sometimes, is really important in order to achieve the things that you want, so that you can process it and you can process why certain things are important to you. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation I had with Alan. I think there were so many great takeaways. I love going back and thinking about what those things are. One of the things that we talked about in here is the importance of performance coaching. And that is something that we do at the B3 Method Institute. And really important to have that outside person and community that can help support you. So when Alan talked about, the things you need to do at an individual level, when we do coaching, we're helping you understand what you need to do at the individual level, but we also create communities so that you have accountability and people there to help you and be right by your side to keep you accountable to those things that you are doing individually as well, and have that support of people that are going through the same process. So if that type of work is interesting and important to you to be doing and taking that time to put in the reps, definitely go to our website, and we have a link directly to where you can learn more about these programs right on our podcast page. So if you go to amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast, you will see it right there with a link that drives you right to it, and also with special offer codes. But we would love to have you as a part of it and to help you on this journey, as well as we all take these journeys. Once we are on one thing, then it's time for the next. And so it's these small changes that really make those pivots and shifts in our life. So thank you so much for supporting this podcast. And I hope to see you in a future course, and continue to listen to these great interviews. Hopefully they are inspiring to you and you're able to take some actions away for yourself. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.